Hi, we're reading chapter 14 of The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne today. And this chapter picks up right where chapter 13 left off. So at the end of 13, Hester's decided that she's going to confront Chillingworth about what he's been doing to Dimmesdale. And that's what's happening as this chapter begins. She sees him and she's going to have Pearl go play so she can talk to Chillingworth. Hester bade little Pearl run down to the margin of the water and play with the shells and tangled seaweed until she should have talked a while with yonder gatherer of herbs. So the child flew away like a bird, and making bare her small white feet, went pattering along the moist margin of the sea. Here and there she came to a full stop, and peeped curiously into a pool left by the retiring tide as a mirror for Pearl to see her face in. Forth peeped at her out of the pool with dark, glistening curls around her head, and an elf smile in her eyes, the image of a little maid whom Pearl, having no other playmate, invited to take her hand and run a race with her. But the visionary little maid, on her part, beckoned likewise, as if to say, "This is a better place, come thou into the pool." And Pearl, stepping in, mid-leg deep, beheld her own white feet at the bottom while out of a still lower depth came the gleam of a kind of fragmentary smile floating to and fro in the agitated water. Meanwhile, her mother had accosted the physician. So there's not a whole lot going on in the first paragraph. It's just she's playing in a tide pool. She sees her reflection. That's all that's going on. "I would speak a word with you," said she, "a word that concerns us much." "Aha! And is it Mistress Hester that has a word for old Roger Chillingworth?" answered he, raising himself from his stooping posture. "With all my heart. Why, mistress, I hear good tidings of you on all hands. No longer ago than yester-eve, a magistrate, a wise and godly man, was discoursing of your affairs, Mistress Hester, and whispered me that there had been question concerning you in the council. It was debated whether or no, with safety to the weal, yonder Scarlet Letter might be taken off your bosom. On my life, Hester, I made my entreaty to the worshipful magistrate that it might be done forthwith." "It lies not in the pleasure of the magistrates to take off this badge," calmly replied Hester. "Were I worthy to be quit of it, it would fall away of its own nature, or be transformed into something that would speak a different purport." "Nay, then, wear it if it suits you better," rejoined he. "A woman must needs follow her own fancy touching the adornment of her person. The letter is gaily embroidered and shows right bravely on your bosom." Okay, Chillingworth's kind of being a bit sarcastic here in this part of the chapter when he sees her. He's like, "Oh, is it Madam Hester or Mistress Hester that wants to come talk to me?" And then he says, "I've heard lots of good things about you." What he does say that would be true is that they are considering letting Hester take the letter off. Now, the sarcasm comes in when he says, "Oh, I told him right away that they should definitely let you take it off just immediately." That I don't think is especially true, or maybe he said it, but he didn't mean it. And Hester says that it lies not in the pleasure of the magistrates to take the badge off, that if she's worthy to be rid of the letter, to not have to wear it, that it'll just fall off on its own, kind of like as if by magic. Or it will be transformed into something that would speak a different purport. So it will start meaning something else, which it really already has. We found that out in the last chapter, that people started to think of the A as able instead of adultery. So while Hester may not realize or feel like she's worthy to not have to wear the letter anymore, Hawthorne is sort of hinting for us here that maybe she is, because people are already seeing her differently. All this while, Hester had been looking steadily at the old man, and was shocked as well as wonder-smitten to discern what a change had been wrought upon him within the past 7 years. It was not so much that he had grown older, for though the traces of advancing life were visible, he wore his age well, and seemed to retain a wiry vigor and alertness. But the former aspect of an intellectual and studious man, calm and quiet, which was what she best remembered in him, had altogether vanished, and had been succeeded by an eager, searching, almost fierce, yet carefully guarded look. It seemed to be his wish and purpose to mask this expression with a smile. But the latter played him false, and flickered over his visage so derisively that the spectator could see his blackness all the better for it. Ever and anon, too, there came a glare of red light out of his eyes, as if the old man's soul were on fire, and kept on smoldering duskily within his breast until, by some casual puff of passion, it was blown into a momentary flame. This he repressed as speedily as possible, and strove to look as if nothing of the kind had happened. All right, the book is telling us yet again just how much Chillingworth has changed and how he used to look calm and kind and studious and all of these pleasant things. All that's gone. It says that he has this eager, searching, almost fierce yet carefully guarded look that he tries to keep hidden with a smile, but the smile doesn't do anything but make him look even more evil. So it doesn't really work out for him. It also mentioned his eyes, and this is significant for you to know what's going on with his eyes. It says that they glow red from time to time, as if his soul were on fire, and you see this like bright flame in his eyes every once in a while. But as soon as it happens, he immediately tries to hide it. Now, do people's eyes really glow red or shoot fire? Of course not, or not shoot fire, but you know what I mean. No. So this is yet another example of Hawthorne using that dark romanticism. Anything supernatural or unrealistic, not just far-fetched, but like flat out could not happen. That's dark romanticism. In a word, old Roger Chillingworth was a striking evidence of man's faculty of transforming himself into a devil if he will only for a reasonable space of time undertake a devil's office. This unhappy person had effected such a transformation by developing himself for 7 years to the constant analysis of a heart full of torture and deriving his enjoyment thence, and adding fuel to those fiery tortures which he analyzed and gloated over. So the book here finally, although it's mentioned it several times, outright tells you that Chillingworth is an example of a man that has transformed himself into a devil. How did he do that, or why does that happen? It says it's because he has spent 7 years devoting himself to constantly analyzing this heart full of torture, meaning Dimmesdale's, and taking pleasure in it. And what's more, then adding his own torture on top of it. So his evil doings over the last 7 years are what have turned him into a devil. The Scarlet Letter burned on Hester Prynne's bosom. Here was another ruin, the responsibility of which came partly home to her. So Hester feels like, as she's looking at Chillingworth and she sees what he's turned into, she feels like it's at least partly her own fault, and she feels bad. "What see you in my face?" asked the physician, "that you look at it so earnestly?" "Something that would make me weep, if there were any tears bitter enough for it," answered she, but let it pass. "It is of yonder miserable man that I would speak." "And what of him?" cried Roger Chillingworth, eagerly, as if he loved the topic and were glad of an opportunity to discuss it with the only person to whom he could make a confidant. "Not to hide the truth, Mistress Hester, my thoughts happen just now to be busy with the gentleman, so speak freely, and I will make answer." He's like, "Well, it's funny you mention him, because I was just thinking about him." "When we last spake together," said Hester, "now 7 years ago, it was your pleasure to extort a promise of secrecy as touching the former relation betwixt yourself and me." So when she talked to him 7 years ago in the jail, and he asked her to keep his secret. "As the life and good fame of yonder man were in your hands, there seemed no choice to me save to be silent, in accordance with your behest. Yet it was not without heavy misgivings that I thus bound myself, for having cast off all duty towards other human beings, there remained a duty towards him, and something whispered me that I was betraying it in pledging myself to keep your counsel. Since that day," so she's like, "I felt like I had no choice, so I agreed to keep your secret, even though I felt like it was a bad idea. Now, you tread behind his every footstep. You are beside him, sleeping and waking. You search his thoughts. You burrow and rankle in his heart. Your clutch is on his life. and you cause him to die daily a living death, and still he knows you not. In permitting this, I have surely acted a false part by the only man to whom the power was left me to be true. What choice had you? Asked Roger Chillingworth. My finger pointed at this man would have hurled him from his pulpit into a dungeon, thence peradventure to the gallows. It had been better so, said Hester Prynne. What evil have I done the man? Asked Roger Chillingworth again. I tell thee, Hester Prynne, the richest fee that ever physician earned from monarch could not have bought such care as I have wasted on this miserable priest. But for my aid, his life would have burned away in torments within the first 2 years after the perpetration of his crime and thine. For, Hester, his spirit lacked the strength that could have borne up, as thine has, beneath a burden like the Scarlet Letter. Oh, I could reveal a goodly secret. But enough. What art can do I have exhausted on him. That he now breathes and creeps about on earth is owing all to me. Better he had died at once, said Hester Prynne. Yea, woman, thou sayest truly, cried old Roger Chillingworth, letting the lurid fire of his heart blaze out before her eyes. Better he had died at once. Never did mortal suffer what this man has suffered, and all in the sight of his worst enemy. He has been conscious of me. He's felt an influence dwelling always upon him like a curse. He knew by some spiritual sense, for the Creator never made another being so sensitive as this. He knew that no friendly hand was pulling at his heartstrings, and that an eye was looking curiously into him, which sought only evil, and found it. But he knew not that the eye and hand were mine. With the superstition common to his brotherhood, he fancied himself given over to a fiend, to be tortured with frightful dreams and desperate thoughts, the sting of remorse and despair of pardon, as a foretaste of what awaits him beyond the grave. But it was the constant shadow of my presence, the closest propinquity of the man whom he had most vilely wronged, and who had grown to exist only by this perpetual poison of the direst revenge. Yea, indeed, he did not err. There was a fiend at his elbow. A mortal man with once a human heart has become a fiend for his especial torment. The unfortunate physician, while uttering these words, lifted his hands with a look of horror, as if he beheld some frightful shape which he could not recognize, usurping the place of his own image in a glass. Okay, so Roger Chillingworth agrees. He says, Hester, you didn't have any choice. You had to go along with it. Or I would have told, and he would have been put in the dungeon, or worse, killed. She says he would have been better off if I had done that, or if that had happened. He says, what have I done? I didn't hurt him. If anything, I've saved him. I kept the guy alive. If it weren't for me, he would have died 5 years ago, Hester. He's not strong like you. He couldn't have handled the pressure. And she says again, he would have been better off if he had died right away. Chillingworth says, you're right. He would have, because there is not another human who has ever suffered the way that he has suffered, and it's happened completely in the sight of his worst enemy, Chillingworth, of course. And if you think about it, that makes sense. It's really bad to screw up. We know that as people, but it's even worse when you screw up in front of people that you know don't like you, or that you know hate you, because not only do they not feel sympathetic for you, they actually take pleasure in your mess up, right? So that's what Chillingworth says. He says, you're right, he probably would have been better off dead, because he knows he's making him miserable, and he enjoys that idea. It was one of those moments. So when Chillingworth says all this, it's like he is looking at himself for the first time. It's like this is the first time he's really, truly realizing just how bad he is, just how evil he is. It was one of those moments which sometimes occur only at the interval of years, when a man's moral aspect is faithfully revealed to his mind's eye. Not improbably, he had never before viewed himself as he did now. Hast thou not tortured him enough? Said Hester, noticing the old man's look. Has he not paid thee all? No, he has but increased the debt, answered the physician, and as he proceeded, his manner lost its fiercer characteristics and subsided into gloom. Dost thou remember me, Hester, as I was 9 years agone? Even then I was in the autumn of my days, nor was it the early autumn. But all my life had been made up of earnest, studious, thoughtful, quiet years bestowed faithfully for the increase of mine own knowledge, and faithfully, too, though this latter object was but casual to the other, faithfully for the advancement of human welfare. No life had been more peaceful and innocent than mine, few lives so rich with benefits conferred. Dost thou remember me? Was I not, though you might deem me cold, nevertheless a man thoughtful for others, craving little for himself, kind, true, just, and of constant, if not warm affections? Was I not all this? All this and more, said Hester. And what am I now? Demanded he, looking into her face and permitting the whole evil within him to be written on his features. I have already told thee what I am, a fiend. Who made me so? It was myself, cried Hester, shuddering. It was I, not less than he. Why hast thou not avenged thyself on me? I have left thee to the Scarlet Letter, replied Roger Chillingworth. If that have not avenged me, I can do no more. He laid his finger on it with a smile. It has avenged thee, answered Hester Prynne. I judged no less, said the physician. And now, what wouldst thou with me touching this man? I must reveal the secret, answered Hester firmly. He must discern thee in thy true character. What may be the result I know not, but this long debt of confidence due from me to him, whose bane and ruin I have been, shall at length be paid. So far as concerns the overthrow or preservation of his fair frame and his earthly state, and perchance his life, he is in thy hands. Nor do I, whom the Scarlet Letter has disciplined to truth, though it be the truth of red-hot iron entering into the soul, nor do I perceive such advantage in his living any longer a life of ghastly emptiness that I shall stoop to implore thy mercy. Do as thou wilt. Do with him as thou wilt. There is no good for him, no good for me, no good for thee. There is no good for little Pearl. There is no path to guide us out of this dismal maze. Okay, so when Chillingworth says that Dimmesdale has not repaid him, he has only increased the debt, what on earth does he mean? As we go through that page, we find out that Chillingworth blames Dimmesdale completely for his own transformation, Chillingworth's transformation. He blames Dimmesdale for turning him evil, for turning him into a fiend, which obviously isn't 100% true because Chillingworth had the choice, but he blames Dimmesdale. So he's out. He was already out to get him, but now he just wants him to suffer that much more. Because he feels like he ruined his life. Hester finally says, okay, Chillingworth, I have to tell him who you are. I'm going to tell him the truth. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. I have to tell him. She says that his life will be in your hands. I'm not going to ask or beg you to keep him alive or help him anymore because he's miserable. So she's like, you can do what you want, but I'm going to tell him the truth. And then she says there's no good for any of us in this situation. And so you get this little hint at just how desperate the situation is, or the despair that Hester is feeling. And Chillingworth kind of feels bad for her. Woman, I could well nigh pity thee, said Roger Chillingworth, unable to restrain a thrill of admiration too, for there was a quality almost majestic in the despair which she expressed. Thou hadst great elements. Peradventure hadst thou met earlier with a better love than mine. This evil had not been. I pitied thee for the good that has been wasted in thy nature. And I thee, answered Hester Prynne, for the hatred that has transformed a wise and just man to a fiend. Wilt thou yet purge it out of thee, and be once more human? So she's like, I'm really sorry that all of this hate has caused you to turn evil. And then she says, will you not purge it out of thee? So she's saying, why don't you just let it go? Get rid of all this evil and this hate that is in you. It's not, if not for his sake, then doubly for thine own. Forgive and leave his further retribution to the power that claims it. I said but now that there could be no good event for him or thee or me, who are here wandering together in this gloomy maze of evil, and stumbling at every step over the guilt wherewith we have strewn our path. It is not so. There might be good for thee and thee alone, since thou hast been deeply wronged, and hast it at thy will to pardon. Wilt thou give up that only privilege? Wilt thou reject that priceless benefit? So she says, I said that there was no good for any of us, but I was wrong. There could be good for you. You could let this go. Forgive Dimsdale. Let God deal with his punishment and move on with your life. You could still get out of this. You could still be good. Peace, Hester, peace, replied the old man, with gloomy sternness. It is not granted me to pardon. I have no such power as thou tellest me of. My old faith, long forgotten, comes back to me and explains all that we do and all we suffer. By thy first step awry, thou didst plant the germ of evil, but since that moment it has all been a dark necessity. Ye that have wronged me are not sinful, save in a kind of typical illusion. Neither am I fiend-like, who have snatched a fiend's office from his hands. It is our fate. Let the black flower blossom as it may. Now go thy ways, and deal as thou wilt with yonder man. He waved his hand, and betook himself again to his employment of gathering herbs. And that's how it ends. So when she says to him, there could still be good for you, you can get out of this, he says, no, Hester, just be quiet. He says, peace, calm down. He says, it's too late. This is fate. This is just what's going to happen is going to happen, is what he tells her. And then he goes on and says, go on thy way and deal as thou wilt with yonder man. So he says, go ahead and tell him if you want to tell him. Do what you want. And that's how the chapter ends. Quick recap. The whole point of this chapter is for Hester to confront Chillingworth about the fact that he's been torturing Dimmesdale. Due to the dedication he's had for this revenge, Chillingworth has become the embodiment of evil. Like, he is described in so many ways like the devil. And they have this discussion about that, and Hester ends up informing him she's going to tell Dimmesdale who he really is, and he says, go ahead. And that's the basic review or overview of what we've just read.